Alright you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, this is your next Q&A. Like always, there was a lot of good questions. I wasn't able to get them all in, but if I didn't get you on this one, I will get you on the next one. Without further ado, let's get straight to it. So the Martin 9400 wants to know, what is the difference between a crash dummy and a good soldado? How can someone know if they're being given the opportunity to prove themselves versus just being looked at as a disposable pawn? That's a good question, and I'm sure it's probably one that's asked a lot. Unfortunately, because of the emphasis that's placed on developing deception and deceptive tactics, it's extremely hard to detect these things outwardly. I mean, think about it. We're taught how to be chameleons and masters of deception. It comes with the territory. Learning how to get the drop on someone, preying on the element of surprise, or avoiding becoming an unsuspecting victim yourself. This also comes down to what we call our sixth sense, or as I often refer to in my stories, your spidey senses. That little voice in the back of our minds that tells us the answers to these kinds of questions when we really don't know. I don't want to get too far off track, but from a personal standpoint, let me just say this. From doing so much time in the shoe, or from just doing so much time isolated, it allowed me to hone in on a deeper sense of awareness, and it taught me how to pay closer attention to all the details. The things that I normally would have missed. It's these same senses you would rely on when asking yourself if you were being used as a crash dummy or as a disposable pawn. All you can do is try your best to detect these things by looking for the signs that might tell you, that might cue you in to the red flags. There's nothing complicated about it. This is what separates someone who's considered seasoned versus someone who's not. It's that simple. If you think about it, we're indoctrinated and taught how to develop both sides of this. On one hand, when it comes to our security, we're taught how to detect threats and how to develop a keen, heightened sense of awareness. The type of awareness that can literally mean the difference between life and death. And on the flip side, we're also taught how to mask and disguise our intentions so that we can navigate without being detected. I guess if you're lucky, you'll be able to detect something in the climate that will help you pick up on deception when it's being used against you. That gut feeling that makes your spidey senses tingle. As far as knowing when someone's being used as a pawn versus someone who's given the opportunity to prove themselves, every situation is different. The circumstances are different, the facts are different, and the people are different. So again, it just depends on all these things. If you stay sharp and your feelers are always dialed in, you'll catch these things and stay a step ahead of the game. So Lowdown 2424 wants to know, California has the big four prison gangs, MA, NF, AB, BGF. Who are the groups that have predominant control, influence in the feds since it is nationwide? There's several different gangs within the federal prison system that are considered forces to be reckoned with. Here's a few. The DC Blacks, Latin Kings, Gangster Disciples, Tango Blast, Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, United Blood Nation, Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, the Back East Faction, Texas Syndicate, Neta, Barrio Azteca, etc., etc. These are just a few of some of the more dominant gangs within the federal prison system, but trust me, there's a lot more. Like I've said before, the politics in the federal prison system are a lot different than it is in the state prison system. There's a lot more racial division, and most of the gangs are broken up by different states. When a conflict develops with someone from California, other groups don't recognize any of the internal divisions that there might be amongst Norteños and Sureños, or Northern California and Southern California. The states are broken up by states. These are called cars. Example, you'll have the California car, the Arizona car, the Utah car, the Colorado car, the Texas car, the Washington car, etc., etc. The one thing I can tell you is that the California gangs have had an intricate impact on how the politics have been played in federal prison, and that these gangs have single-handedly changed the politics because of the huge influx of California gang members that have entered the federal system over the course of these last 10 to 15 years. Without question, the Nuestra Familia and the Mexican Mafia have both grown a lot stronger over the last 2 decades. But I think the Aryan Brotherhood and the DC Blacks are seriously underrated and are two gangs that are strong just because of the sheer numbers alone. So Sleepy Jones 9625 wants to know, do cellies fight a lot in the shoe? Because they're always on top of each other. I'll be honest with you, At times, it can get testy and difficult to live in a small area that's no bigger than a closet with someone else day in and day out. You really have to find someone you're compatible with and someone who knows how to do that kind of time. And if they don't, then you have to sit them down and come to some kind of mutual agreement about how you guys are going to coexist in that cell. Everything from cleaning the cell daily on a rotating schedule to how bird baths are done, how the facilities are used, etc., etc. It might seem petty, but some people are set in their ways and certain things drive them apeshit. Leaving soap on the sink, not wiping out the sink, spitting in the toilet and not the sink when you're brushing your teeth. All these things are important, especially in a cell like that, because more often than not, your sink, your toilet, and other things serve dual functions. In other words, your sink is not only where you wash up, but it also serves as a place where you might cook your food. Your toilet is obviously used for what it's made for, but for some people, it also serves as a place where certain things are washed and cleaned. So it just depends. I've seen guys up there fight over the pettiest shit. Not just the soap on the sink or not wiping out the sink, but also for not flushing when using the toilet, where one cellie starts drinking too much coffee that's supposed to last them both for the whole month. I've seen guys go to blows because one cellie thought the other was abusing their community coffee by taking too big of spoonfuls. It might sound crazy, but when you're in survival mode and you guys only have so much food or coffee to last for that whole month, it needs to be rationed. One of my biggest pet peeves was hygiene. You can only do so much to encourage your cellie to get into certain routines and habits, but when it comes to hygiene, that's something that I wasn't willing to compromise on. Because keeping up your own personal hygiene is not only about respecting yourself, but it's also about respecting your cellie and affording him that courtesy. Nobody wants to smell your ass. If you live by yourself and you choose to live like a slob, then that's on you. But you can't do that when you're in a cell with someone else. There's a lot of things that you have to learn about being in that type of environment. But as with everything else, you'll eventually get it and find that middle ground that works. Usually, you can't have two A-type personalities living in the same cell, because eventually you're going to end up bumping heads. If you're an A-type of personality guy like myself, it's better to have a cellie who's laid back and easygoing so that it's just easier to get along. Just like everyone else, it took me a while to learn how to do shoot time when I first started going to the shoot back in the early 90s. I was young and I had to adjust to that type of environment. And back then I wasn't used to compromising or being flexible. It's different when you're slammed down doing time in the shoe, because the only time you can get out of the cell is during showers or during your daily hour yard time. So other than that, you're stuck in the cell with your cellie for the rest of the day. Bottom line, you guys need to learn how to program. Once you get into a routine where you guys have a set program, then it's easier to move around and get through the day. Because then you both know what's next on the agenda and you're conscious of where he's at and what he's doing next. There's a lot of things I had to learn. That cell can get small and those walls can close in on you if you let them. When I was younger, there were several times when I almost went to blows with my cellies because we were either both young and didn't want to compromise, or we just weren't used to being boxed in like that. But I learned, and I had to, because eventually shoot time is all I would end up doing. And after doing years of shoot time, to this day, those habits that I developed still have residual effects on me, as I have a serious case of OCD, obsessive cleaning disorder, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm still somewhat antisocial. So Tito Puente wants to know, what role did Jack Ochoa play in the regiment when he got indicted? Was it Lencho's wife who had a wiretap in which all kinds of people got indicted? Jack Ochoa, aka Droopy, was one of Lencho's meth suppliers out there in San Jose sometime around 2005-2006. Of course, Lencho seen the potential in making Droopy part of the team, so he pulled him into the regiment and basically started taking his dope. That's how Lencho operated. If you had something that could benefit him monetarily, he'd pull you into the regiment so that he would basically gain access to those resources and exploit these resources under the guise of NF control. After Lencho got busted, another NF member by the name of Clayton Clark, aka Shorty from San Jose, continued to operate under Lencho while he was still housed in the county jail. Shorty was credited with being the one who arranged a merger with SJG and his hood Westside Gardens. At Lencho's discretion, Shorty continued to work with Droopy, and he supplied the regiment with dope all the way up until everybody got indicted. On December 17, 2007, San Jose PD and Campbell PD conducted a search warrant on the residence of Lencho's wife's house. This was the result of Lencho involving his wife Debbie Corrales in NF business and other things he had no business involving her in. While he was in the county jail, he made hundreds of sloppy phone calls to her, directing her to pick up and drop off money and dope to everyone who was either involved with or associated with his regiment. The cops that raided Debbie's house caught her slipping and put the squeeze on her. They threatened to indict her if she didn't cooperate and assist them in building cases on everyone that was involved in not only Lencho's regiment, but also two other C's who were operating regiments out there, Sammy Wino Ramirez and Charlie Brown Campa. Needless to say, Lencho's wife Debbie cooperated by wearing a wire and taking down all three regiments. This included Jack Droopy Ochoa. This was one of the reasons why Lencho was in trouble. Because of his blessings and the extent of involvement he allowed his wife to be a part of, the cops got a package deal and took all three regiments down, compliments of Lencho. So Garrett Johnson wants to know, any idea why leadership chose to have someone like you set up in a sleepy town like Willits, population 4,893, while neglecting a place like the Tenderloin and a city like San Francisco, population 874,961. Boy, this guy's got all his stats. Do you think this was a tactic from brass or strategy by an individual to keep you isolated, out of the way? I get your parole was to Sonoma County, correct? Well, Petaluma, Rohnert Park, and Santa Rosa are places where the NF can stay off the radar a lot better than Willits. It's like a bad joke. Since these questions are all kind of interrelated, I'm just going to put my answer together and walk through each one. It wasn't a matter of why leadership chose to have someone like me set up in a place like Willits while neglecting a bigger city like San Francisco. I get the basis of your question, but here's a few things you got to understand. I got dumped in Ukiah unexpectedly when I was literally within 10 days to the house. Parole changed my parole plans at the last minute because San Francisco didn't want me to go back out there and continue to wreak havoc like I was. Once my parole plans were changed, we evaluated the entire schism and whether Ukiah or Mendocino County had the kind of potential we were looking for. It was ultimately decided that I break ground out there since it was open territory and there for the taking. Meanwhile, someone else was appointed to oversee San Francisco. You are correct. The population in Willits is 4,893. And this is in stark contrast to San Francisco having a population of 874,961. Those numbers seem clearly lopsided, but at the end of the day, they mean absolutely nothing. Mendocino County turned out to be a gold mine. With all the American Indian casinos out there and the cap money that comes out of surrounding reservations, those numbers you alluded to become deceptive. Trust me, there was more money out there, and the population that's engulfed in meth is a lot more dense than it is in San Francisco. So, no, I don't think it was a tactic by brass or any type of strategy to keep me isolated. Why would they want to do that when I was one of the biggest breadwinners out there? As far as the last part of your question, I couldn't agree with you more. Places like Petaluma, Rohnert Park, and Santa Rosa are definitely places where NF members can blend in the shadows and move a lot more freely. That's why I didn't last out there. Those small towns are hard to maneuver in. Once someone like myself moves in, everyone and their mother knew about it. It was a challenging transition too. Unlike the traditional way I had become accustomed to, where I had recruited NS, NR members, and NF members in the past, I had to improvise by utilizing American Indians, white guys, and wannabes to make up my manpower and to use these guys to assist me in my daily affairs. So SoCal 3233 wants to know, do you know if Achali, aka Lizard, ever wrote a book, and would you think it would be a good read, giving his perspective? As a matter of fact, I do know if Lizard wrote a book. He did write a book. Not too many people know about his book because it was never published and he never talked about it. From my understanding, he started to write a book during the time when he was in custody, waiting for Operation Black Widow to adjudicate. The name of his book was going to be titled Shattered Truths. I believe he wrote about 5 chapters of his manuscript, and then for whatever reason he lost interest. I'm not sure where he was in custody at, but Gang Intel apparently took his book and locked up on it. When I got indicted, they used several predicate offenses against me from Operation Black Widow, so the chapters of his book were actually given to me and my co-defendants. As far as whether or not I think it would be a good read, I don't like to critique other books on the NF because of the book I wrote myself, but I'm just gonna say this. Lizard's book was over the top. I think he overthought it when he was writing it because it just didn't flow like you would expect it to. It read more like a synopsis about the NF opposed to his personal story. If he would have came from a different angle and just told his story, keeping it raw and gritty, I believe he would have had a very interesting book. I know most of his story, and I think people would have been fascinated by it, but unfortunately, he never finished that book or wrote another one before his demise. So Seamus Donahue wants to know, you mentioned rubbing elbows with Billy Ray Hamilton in the San Quentin Adjustment Center. Please give us some insight into him, as he was said to be one of the most feared dudes on death row. Hamilton sponsored Kobe Phillips into the AB. So I was neighbors with Billy Ray Hamilton in the San Quentin Adjustment Center sometime around 1997. The AC was almost exclusively all condemned inmates who were either validated or it was like their shoe program. At that time, they still allowed some ADSEG inmates to be housed in the AC, and that's where they used to house me most of the time when I went through San Quentin. In order to be housed over there, you either had to have some influence over your people, you had to have a history of being assaulted, or you had to have a history of assaulting staff. I was identified as having influence, so they would basically send me to the AC as a way to keep me separated from most of the Norteños who were housed in East Block. They had the BGF Northern Mexican Yard, the AB Mexican Mafia Yard, they had an integrated yard, and then they had 2 Crip yards. The Crips were split. Tookie had a following, and then Little Fee from the Rolling 60s had a following on a separate yard. The Crips that were behind Tookie went out to one of the Crip yards, and then the Crips that were behind Little Fee went out to the yard with him. So at this particular time when I was neighbors with Billy Ray Hamilton, there were only about 5 or 6 other ABs on the yard with the MA. The MA was deep, but they also had about 30 Sureños out there as well. Billy Ray was cool with me. Even though he was an AB and I was an NF member, it never stood in the way of us extending that respect to each other as neighbors. We exchanged literature, we played chess, we used to hold dialogue about world politics, or whatever it was, we used to chop it up about. The respect was always there, and I knew Billy Ray as a stand-up type of guy. If you didn't know him personally, the one thing I'll say about him is that he had a real deep voice and he talked like a straight cowboy, and he had a deep accent. While I was there, another AB named Curtis Price, who I believe is now deceased, was accused of disrespecting some of the MA that was on the tier with him, and it became a big issue. I had been on the tier with Price during another time I was there, and he was the kind of dude that never spoke to anyone on the tier. And if it ever got too loud, he was known for blowing out the power so nobody could watch their TVs or listen to their radios. Like I said, this issue escalated to the point to where the MA green-lighted Price and tried to kill him on the yard. Unfortunately for Billy Ray, he wasn't involved. He was liked and well respected by all the Sureños and the MA there. But when this kicked off, Billy Ray did what he was supposed to do. He attempted to come to his boys' assistance and the fight was on. But at the end of the day, they were badly outnumbered and both of them got hit pretty bad. Like I said, I knew Billy Ray Hamilton to be a stand-up type of guy, but from what I heard, he passed away from what I believe was cirrhosis of the liver. So Frank Corsetti wants to know, wouldn't one think it's strange, especially one who knows about prison politics, that Yogi would have had security soldiers around him, especially with his solid status in history and rank, to allow 2 other inmates to hold him down and book him? Knowing prison politics, I personally think the guards were in on it as well and turned a blind eye on it, especially with Yogi supposedly being accused, being involved, and killing a fellow correctional officer. In a nutshell, I think Yogi had a lot going against him, but the help of a correctional officer turning a blind eye, that's all the difference, and especially with an agreement to end hostilities by the top 4 organizations. I agree with almost everything you said. All these different factors worked against him, and in the end, he didn't stand a chance. The Aryan Brotherhood has had a target on Yogi for years, and Yogi should have known this. When CDCR opened up the shoes and released everybody back out to the main lines, the AB seen their opportunity to cash in on that green light, and they pounced on it. It's a very well-known documented fact that Yogi played an intricate role in the San Quentin 6, and that he assisted in the killing of several correctional officers. I've known COs to turn blind eyes about things a lot less egregious than the killing of fellow officers, so it's not a huge leap to think that this was a factor. From what I know about this incident, this didn't happen as soon as Yogi hit the yard. This happened several days later. This is important because I believe that after the first day or two, Yogi and some of the Africanos that had his back may have let their guard down and just got too complacent. These guys strategized and waited until they had a drop on Yogi. I'm currently working on a story that details this incident, but this was a well coordinated and calculated hit. The two AB sympathizers that hit Yogi, Waylon Pitchford and Jason Weaver, sought assistance from some of the other white and Sureño inmates. They had some of these guys strategically walk in formation so that Yogi was separated from his people and isolated in the area where they got him. Then they allegedly had some Sureños set up a scrimmage so that nobody could get to Yogi or assist him as he was being pinned down and stabbed to death. But this could have been avoided, and this was validated by several Africanos that were out there on the yard when it happened. You know how it goes. They probably got comfortable, slacked off on their security, possibly underestimated the threat level, and then the rest is history. When you got two separate groups working together and coordinating that hit in unison, there's not much Yogi could have done standing alone to defend himself. From what I know, the other Africanos that were out there attempted to come to his aid, but by then, it was just too late. The part I didn't understand is why they didn't continue to kick shit off after that incident happened. It should have been on every time the doors opened, and there's no excuse for that. Like I said before, this dude was a catalyst. He was one of their elders. So someone like him should have been the reason why the agreement to end hostilities should have been put on hold, or at least between the Africanos and the Woods and whoever else was involved. But again, I'm working on a profile right now that details that hit as well as many others that were all a part of that last Aryan Brotherhood indictment that targeted their leadership. So Jason M wants to know what made Skip go to the top of the Mexican Mafia's hit list. Because of his history, Skip was solely responsible for kicking off a lot of wars, and the MA was well aware of this. Someone like that surely would have been considered a threat. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Operation Black Widow never would have happened, and if C's like Skip and Corny would have still been in the state system when everyone was kicked back out to the main lines. It would have been interesting to see how the MA would have reacted, and it would have been interesting to see how these two C's would have reacted. These guys have made it clear that they consider any peace treaty, any standstill, or any end of hostilities as a clear act of treason. So I believe it would have kicked off a full-scale war. I doubt that CDCR would have even been prepared to deal with a war of that magnitude. What a lot of people don't know about Skip is that he was always known to be a prolific drug dealer. He was never known to be someone who had a long history of violence. I'll probably do another profile on Skip detailing this, but Skip only became radical in his beliefs after he broke up with his girl Diana Vasquez, who you can see in this newspaper article. This was the love of his life. When Skip lost her and got indicted the first time, he stopped caring about getting back out and became radical. That's when he started getting his face blasted and he just stopped caring about making it back out. Like I said, I'll run a profile on it sometime in the very near future. So Navarro wants to know, regarding the clause you changed in the Constitution, what if the members that stepped back were still in good standings but used their part for monetary gain or tried to do stuff on the unders? They would get whacked, right? Of course. I said that I would allow the C's who had put in years of loyal service to go on with their lives. But this is also only if they phased out without creating or causing any discord. Anyone who started working against the organization, who threatened the organization, or who by their own choices became a liability to the organization would fall outside the perimeters of this clause. There would obviously be conditions, and these conditions would require you to keep your secrets to yourself, not to start providing training to law enforcement, not to interfere with the organization's street business, not to start trying to collect the organization's money fraudulently by leading people to believe that you're still an active member of the organization, etc., etc. These guys know what these boundaries are. If you yourself become a hindrance, if you interfere with the organization's progress, or if you in some other way dishonor yourself and do things you know you shouldn't be doing, then you automatically become a target. That all goes without saying. But if you've reached an age to where your physical capacity is no longer beneficial to the organization, you've put in multiple years of service and you vow to just settle down with your family and stay out of the way, you're not providing harmful information to law enforcement, and you just want to be a father, a husband, a grandpa, and just a regular civilian living out there for the rest of your life, then why not? Why not let someone like that just go on in life? He's not a threat. He's not interfering with anyone. This individual also becomes someone who doesn't become susceptible to becoming an informant, or someone who turns against the organization simply because he's fearful of the repercussions that come along with making these kinds of choices. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Would you rather have guys working alongside you because they truly want to work alongside you, or dudes working alongside you because they're obligated to work alongside you and because they're fearful of making the choices that they obviously already want to make? It's a no-brainer. With clauses like this, there wouldn't have been some of the black spots in the NF's history, such as Brown Bob and Jomo from Salinas. So Henry Marquez wants to know, after Mikey and Brown Bob's bad calls, you figured they would get it right. Tibbs' situation should have never happened. It sends the wrong message to anyone who's still down for the cause. What's really going on? All three of these hits were bad calls in my opinion, but all three of them were carried out to serve different purposes. Mike Eo's hit was just a bad hit all the way around, and it was money motivated. That's about the worst black mark in the organization's history that's out there, and this is something that's widely known. The organization as a whole had no underlying motive or purpose for this. This was more personal, and it was orchestrated by a handful of individuals who I would consider to be renegades or tyrants. Brown Bob's murder was another bad hit that created more strife within the organization than it did good. But his murder was sanctioned, and the underlying purpose was to serve more as a warning up and down the ranks than anything else. The warning was clear, that nobody was above NF law, regardless of rank or position. If you abandoned your responsibilities, or if it was determined that you were no longer working in the best interest of the organization, that you would be touched, period. That was the bigger objective that went beyond just killing Brown Bob. I know there was speculation going around that he was working with MAG, Mothers Against Gangs, and that he covered up the NF tattoo on his back. But the main reason he was killed was because he went AWOL, and more importantly, because he was officially charged with treason, due to his position with Big Smiley not being clear. His mistake was not making his position clear, and because of this, it was assumed that he was in cahoots with Big Smiley. The concern with Tibbs was the influence he still held, and how he was ultimately going to decide to use that influence. He was very vocal about the agreement to end hostilities with respect to the state system, and this wasn't in line with what the others wanted. Tibbs probably should have toned down his position, but that wasn't Tibbs' style. He was pretty forthright with his position on certain things, and unfortunately for him, this is what led to his demise. Boss with the hot sauce, love your book and content. That's why I'm a loyal listener since day one. I'm completely enthralled with the Cali prison politics, which is nothing like the way prison is on the East Coast. I'm born and raised in Philly and grew up in the heart of La Cosa Nostra and being around the Italian mob on a daily basis. Has there ever been any high-ranking or made member of any of the big four that you know of that were from the East Coast, not born here, but lived out there most of their lives? Say a Spanish cat from New York or Philly gets jammed up in California while on vacation or some shit and gets sent to the pen. How does that work with clicking up? Do they just pick a side, or would it most likely be what area of California they got pinched in? If they got pinched in Northern California and the county is ran by Northerners, they would pretty much side with them since that's the dominating clique where they await their time. Also, if they aren't from a California street gang and are completely unknown, will they even be embraced if they prove to be solid? Respect to California and the West Coast from an old Dago on the right coast. I'm not sure if he was originally from the East Coast, but I know there was an individual who they called Manzanas who had family in New York and then moved back out there after he paroled. Manzana was a high-ranking NF member who was also involved with the killing of Cheyenne as well. As to your second question, it would depend on that individual himself. I actually ran into a guy from Chicago and he chose to ride with the Norteños. This guy could either ride with the North, the South, or whoever else he identified with. Sometimes someone like this might even ride with the others, the Polynesian card. Whoever he decided to ride with, no matter who it was, he'd have to be down with their politics and ride with them whenever they got into a conflict. You indicated or asked if it might depend on where they got pinched at. That's a possibility, as it might determine who he relates with more. There is no clear protocol on this. A lot of it would depend on him and where he wanted to place his loyalties. And finally, as to your last question, it wouldn't matter if he was in a gang or not. All that would matter is if he was a solid dude. The other part of it would obviously be if the individuals he chose to roll with embraced him as well. Again, all I think that would really matter at the end of the day is if he was a solid dude and if he carried himself like a stand-up guy. So Don Miguel Gonzalez wants to know, have you ever been present when an associate of your previous organization was wrongfully deemed not good? And if you were, was there anyone or yourself speaking on the individual's behalf? Yes, I was involved with the investigation that was conducted on Mike MC Castillo from Salinas. This is all documented in my book. This is when MC came into possession of that letter that was written by Rico addressed to Tex. I never asked MC how he came into possession of that letter or where he got it. And in retrospect, I don't remember him offering up an explanation either. At any rate, Rico's intentions and his position with regard to MC was clear, based on the letter's verbiage and what he was expressing to Tex. I can't remember it word for word, but Rico was basically saying that MC was skimming money, that he was no longer working in the organization's best interest, and this was because of MC's position on Pablo Castaneda in the county jail when he allowed him to walk away instead of hitting him. And then, one of the comments that Rico made in regards to MC that clearly stood out to me was, out with the old, in with the new. Because of the frivolous accusations that Rico was making, and because he had Lobo confirming everything he was saying, I became aware of the fact that Tex issued a green light on MC, and that this was being done underhandedly. MC was usually real laid back, and not much shook him out of his character. However, he knew and understood that this had the potential to turn into something ugly, and this is when he asked me for my assistance. At the time, MC was short to the house, but I was getting ready to go back to the shoe in Pelican Bay, so I was in a position to touch base with those who needed to be contacted, and that's why MC was depending on me. He laid out all the details of what had taken place in the Salinas regiment, including the bank, the unaccounted for money, the detraction between Rico, Lobo, and MC, and all the other issues that were involved. Coincidentally, I ended up landing in a good pod once I got back to the Bay and had a direct line to Corny and Pinky. For 2 weeks straight, I struck up report after report addressing all these things MC had told me. Corny was the one who conducted the investigation on behalf of himself and Pinky. But at the conclusion of submitting all my reports, the green light on MC was rescinded and he was fully cleared. This was important because I knew MC was still at San Quentin, and my objective was to get the investigation concluded before he paroled and was placed in harm's way. Corny had even assured me that he was clear based on the information and all the reports I submitted. He told me not to worry about it, and then I remember MC paroled in August of 1998. After looking further into this myself, I found out that the green light that Tex issued on MC was in fact rescinded by Corny, but that this wouldn't have mattered either way. Bottom line, MC didn't have a chance regardless of what Corny or Brass did, because Rico just claimed that he never received the clearance that Corny sent him, and thus proceeded forward with the green light. But this was bullshit. Rico had received the clearance. His own wife, Regina, confirmed giving him the letter, but he just continued claiming that he never received it. So yeah, this situation right here comes pretty close to what you described in your question, where I personally spoke up on another NF member's behalf who was wrongfully deemed no good. So ABW wants to know, why do you guys keep wheelers? Why not read them and throw them away? I don't get it. Why keep something that can fuck you over hard? I guess the best way to answer this is to liken it to why anyone would keep police reports or other legal documents. Sometimes it's to maintain confirmation about something. Other forms of documents that might be kept in the form of wheelers would be rosters, B&Ls, bad news lists, or just new mandates that need to be filtered out. I'm not one who advocates for keeping a lot of paperwork or bundles of kites that aren't needed either. They become more of a liability and a threat to security. But every scenario is different, and sometimes maintaining these documents are absolutely necessary. Again, I get it. Taking a chance of getting caught with a bunch of hot wheelers is a chance you take, especially in this day and time where just the fact that you being in possession of these kites is enough to get you a 186.22 gang enhancement. But again, sometimes it's not as easy as just reading these wheelers and then disposing them. It's policy and NF protocol to maintain a B&L, updated rosters of all active households, and anyone who functions in any of the street establishments. So with that said, there's always going to be some type of wheelers that are going to be maintained for security purposes. And this is why they're taught to keep these secured. So the real Rico Mercado wants to know, or is stating, the murder of Yogi should have broken all the state truces. I already addressed this situation in a question above, and like I said, I'm currently working on another profile that details this hit, so stay tapped in for that. But I agree with you, exactly what you alluded to in your question, or should I say your statement. I agree that this situation should have been the reason why the state's agreement to end hostilities should have never been honored, or at least between the Africanos and the Woods. It's clearly justified. The AB knew that this had the potential to threaten this agreement when they hit Yogi, and yet that didn't stop them. I would have been seeing red, and I would have felt like the AB betrayed this agreement when they moved forward with hitting Yogi. So Edward Duran wants to know, I'm confused about the NF ranking system. What does a C mean? As far as the ranking system and what a C means, a C is a carnal. It means brother in Spanish, a familiano of the Nuestra Familia. As far as the ranking system, this is the short answer. The NF has a category system that ranks its members by grade and status. There's 3 categories, with Cat 1 being the lowest and Cat 3 being the highest. Cat 1 members are new members coming into the organization. Their whole purpose is to study and absorb as much NF schooling and NF history as possible. They're considered to be unproven and are not considered to be part of any leadership circles. Cat 2 members are members who know the NF schooling, the Constitution, the concepts, the street activities, etc., etc. They have it memorized, they know the correct interpretation, and they can now become teachers for the Cat 1s. They're still not fully proven, and these guys are the ones who are likely to be appointed as the regimental commanders for the street regiments. Cat 3 members are the spit and shine. This is the management level. These members have proven themselves and have shown unwavering loyalty. There is no status higher than a Cat 3. Just based on the fact that you've been voted in to fulfill a position as one of the 3 generals, or as a member of either the GC General Council or the IC Inner Council, doesn't mean you have more rank than any of the other Cat 3s. All this means is that you've been delegated more responsibility and that you've been voted in to fulfill a position. But these kinds of upper management positions are always chosen from the Category 3 pool of members. So GR Flores wants to know, why did Tibbs get hit by Cohete at McCreary, USP? I thought Tibbs was that guy that couldn't get touched. I already addressed this in another question. I don't know where you heard that Tibbs was the guy who couldn't get touched. Everyone within the organization, regardless of position, rank, or status, is expendable and can be touched. I would agree that I myself thought Tibbs was more secure in his position within the NF than a lot of others below him. But I would never say that anyone is beyond being touched, especially if they violate NF law or the edicts and dictates of the NF Constitution. But in a nutshell, this is what I think happened. Tibbs was celled up with DC in the Bay for a long time, and those two had a pretty strong bond. I think Tibbs might have expressed his support for DC and the whole agreement to end hostilities DC was honoring in the state system. This agreement was perceived as being treasonous by a lot of the leadership in the federal system, and they didn't agree with it. But I think Tibbs might have been a little too forthright about his personal opinion, and that this wasn't accepted well by the others, such as Corny, Skip, Pinky, and maybe even Mad Dog. Tibbs wasn't a threat, at least not physically. He was in his 70s and could barely walk. Look at him in the inserted picture. That was taken right before he was hit. But he becomes a threat in other ways. Someone like Tibbs, who was a former general, has too much influence and still maintained a strong ability to become persuasive to others around him. A lot of people continue to look up to him. So for this purpose, I believe he was hit and was perceived as a threat. Cohete, of course, was just performing cleanup, something he'll continue to owe for the rest of his days on this God-given earth. As we are all aware of by now, Tibbs passed away not long after he was hit. From what I know, he was housed in MCFP Springfield, which is a medical facility. I personally believe that the old fella just gave up. When you've been a part of something for more than half your life, something you wholeheartedly believed in, and then all of a sudden it's taken away and everything changes, that's a hard pill to swallow. On top of being sick, This was probably just a breaking point that became too much for him to handle. Just my opinion though. So Richard Davis wants to know, do blacks check paperwork? Let me make something very clear before I get into this. I have nothing but the utmost love and respect for the Africanos, and nothing I'm about to say is personal or in any way intended as any form of disrespect. Anybody that knows me knows how I am when it comes to all that. As far as whether or not the Africanos check or pull paperwork, for the most part they do. And a lot of the old school BGF members who were schooled right function like they're supposed to. These guys you see inserted in these pictures that I was in the Bay with. But on the flip side, there's a lot of them that don't and who function too loosely. That's just the reality of it. This is why a lot of people accuse them of not screening their people, and in other instances, allow some of their people with R's on their jackets to coexist. You can't take on that carefree position or say, it's not my business, and neglect these type of fundamental responsibilities. This is how you keep your people cleansed and ensure that trash doesn't slip through the cracks. Pulling paperwork, cleaning house, and maintaining these strict policies isn't something that's always been automatic with some of their leadership. I've had the unfortunate experience of having to push some of them to begin following these policies, and even then, this was an arduous task. A lot of times, they make no attempt to pull paperwork because they wouldn't get any compliance if they did, or because it might create conflict. Some of it just comes down to a lack of being educated and gamed up. You can't be discouraged because there's those that don't like to be pressed, that some people become problems when you ask them to produce their paperwork, etc., etc. These are protocols that must be followed, and this is something that the NF, the MA, and the AB have always been meticulous about. There's a lot of good Africanos out there, so this isn't a blanket statement, and you can't say that this applies across the board. Unfortunately, this is a serious part of maintaining your integrity. So when things like this aren't done, or rumors circulate that certain people ain't pushing the kind of line that they're supposed to, it's something that's going to continue to be said until it's proven otherwise. So DP650 wants to know, did you know Fidel De La Riva? He came out on a documentary. Yes, I knew Fidel De La Riva. They call him Boxer, and he's from Selma. I was housed in C11 in the same pod with him sometime between 1997 and 1998. At the time, he was celled up with Luis Montalvo, Lucho from Hayward, and I was celled up with Antonio Solis, Baby Joker from Salinas. Boxer was a high-ranking NF member who at that time was part of the NF's leadership. This concludes this Q&A. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to answering more of your questions. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. If you have a question you want to ask, just drop it anywhere in the comments and we'll find it. Before I close this up, let me again emphasize how important it is that you support us by going on our other channel, Saved Out Media, and subbing to that channel for us. There's a whole different kind of platform that we want to drop on that channel, but we need to get our numbers up first. So please sub to it for us. As always, we want to extend our appreciation to all of you for helping us get the channel to where it is today. You guys deserve the credit, as we wouldn't have been able to do it without your support. We have more content dropping, so stay tapped in for updates. On that note there, this is your boy B, and I'm out.